You're listening to The Table, a podcast series from students at Christian Theological Seminary. Pull up a seat. There is a space at the table for everyone.
Well, hello, and welcome to The Table. I am your hostess with the mostest, Cynthia Newman. Thank you for joining me at my table, where real people chat and chew on how biblical text impacts our real lives. Today at the table, we'll be savoring the story of sisters Martha and Mary in Luke 10 as they host Jesus for dinner. This text has captivated me, especially because commentaries and sermons have often portrayed Mary and Martha in a divisive light. But today we ask, is there space for both women at the table of Jesus Christ, just as they are in all of their unique strengths and weaknesses? We'll explore this topic and more with some notable guests. Two of my esteemed professors from Christian Theological Seminary, Reverend Dr. Amy Lindeman Allen and Reverend Dr. Courtney Buggs. Then we'll close it out with some special guests that I get to eat with quite often around my very own kitchen table at home. So, prepare to feast on a rich discussion as we explore the story of Martha and Mary, podcast style with a little movie flair. It's going to be a thought-provoking and engaging journey, and I can't wait to share it with you.
Sisters, there were never such devoted sisters. Never had to have a chaperone, no sir. I'm here to keep my eye on her. Lord, help the mister who comes between me and my sister. And Lord, help the sister who comes between me and my man.
That was the Clooney sisters from the 1954 classic White Christmas. Well, to get us all on the same plate with Martha and Mary's account, let's have a close reading from the text. Luke 10:38 through 42 reads as follows. Now as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all of the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Here we have two sisters, Mary and Martha, who are hosting Jesus for dinner. Martha is apparently the owner of the home who is taking on the responsibility for hosting and handling all of the preparation that comes along with having guests over, particularly Jesus, the rabbi, the teacher whom many follow, and who travels around with his 12 married men known as his disciples. At first, popular readings of this text cite Mary as the sister who gets it right by sitting at Jesus' feet. However, the New Interpreter Bible Commentary says that Mary is acting male, but are things really as they seem? Welcome Dr. Amy Lindeman Allen to the table to lend insight into the modes of Mary. She is the Associate Professor of New Testament at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the author of The Gifts They Bring, How Children in the Gospels Can Shape an Inclusive Ministry. Well, thank you so much for being on with me today. It's truly my honor as an emerging theologian to have someone of your quality and capability on. So let me ask you a question. As you think about Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus as a student would a teacher, where do you land as far as the lens of maleness? Meaning, is this something that normally, even if they were children, that only the male children would have privy to in this patriarchal society?
That's an excellent question, Cynthia. And it's one that my colleagues have also challenged me on and said, mostly the students in the first century world would have been men. And even when we look at the disciples in the Gospels, right, the ones who are named are the male disciples. On the other hand, we hear in Luke that there were all sorts of women who were following Jesus, who were serving him and ministering to him along the way. That word for minister, actually, it's often translated as serve, but it's the full role of what a deacon would do in our churches today. And so it really is participating in the work of the gospel. Even in normal first century households, young girls were trained up. They were students studying for what their role in life would be. And so there would have been a lot of both some formal and more informal schooling where that role of a young girl being a student would have been embraced. And especially if we imagine Mary in a single mother household, if you will, under her sister Martha, there's this sense where I imagine that Martha is encouraging her to go out and learn about her faith in every opportunity she has. When Martha has so much on her plate, taking care of her young sister, hosting Jesus as a guest, the opportunity for her sister to gain the benefits of Jesus's religious knowledge seems like something that Mary probably would have been eager for, and Martha likely even would have encouraged.
Awesome. Wow, that is very rich. And I appreciate you adding the contextual lens of first century women and what life would have been like. Well, I have one other head story of my own that I want to run by you before we close our time. It occurred to me when I was doing some research that, maybe Mary is actually engaged in an act of resistance, in that, Martha would have been inviting Jesus and all the male disciples and whomever else was traveling along. And Mary would have made the decision to be languishing and to be learning at his feet. And then I wondered, wow, if we think back to first century times, would that have potentially been a statement of resistance to say, no, I'm not going to do what all the other women do. I'm going to sit here and, as Jesus says, get the good part.
So the act of resistance, I think, is actually less on that just clear gender stereotype and more around, first of all, being able to make the decision for herself. Whether we read her as a girl or as a woman, Mary is somebody who is under somebody else's power. And she makes the decision to ignore that power and put the power in Jesus or even in herself instead. So when we have Martha coming to Jesus and saying, why don't you tell her to come help me? It seems as though Martha is recognizing even this act of resistance, is seeing that Mary has chosen to put her allegiance with Jesus before her sister, who's the head of her house, who would have been sort of socially expected to be the one that she's listening to. Even if she was a wife living in someone else's house, she's in Martha's house now, but she's not listening to Martha. She's listening to Jesus. And that act of resistance, that embodying for us what it means to put God as the top authority in our life, even when there's other systems and structures, patriarchy, family values, even just relationships that want to push and pull us in different directions. Mary is absolutely embodying this confidence in saying, I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to do what I discern God to be calling me to do in this moment.
Wow, that is amazing. It sounds like Mary's taking agency. I'm going to use that word.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you for the resistance in thinking about, even at this early stage of your scholarship, new ways to read and approach a text that can hopefully get out into the world and help others to see the value that you find in these biblical characters.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Let's turn our attention toward Martha. In her book, Mary and Martha, Women in the Lives of Jesus, feminist scholar Satoko Yamaguchi says Martha's name means matron or sovereign lady, so it would make sense that she would be a woman who wants things done decent and in order. She has invited people to her table just as I have today, and trust me, it has to be right. Reverend Dr. Courtney Buggs, director of the PhD program in preaching, also at Christian Theological Seminary, stopped by for some table conversation about Martha's life.
Thank you for being on with me. I'm going to lean into asking you questions specifically about Martha, You and I had some engagement about the way that she's been presented and portrayed. And I'm going to say both in commentaries and in preaching. So some of the commentaries that I read, the word shows up, depending on which version you're reading, that Martha was distracted. There's the word that Jesus chastises Martha for being distracted. And yet I want to see behind Martha's curtain and go back into her context and really ask your lens about one, how have you interpreted the role of Martha, whether that be her character traits, what you see in her that maybe people may be missing?
When I look at the text now with a bit more critical eye than maybe I had 10, 15 years ago, I would ask different questions about Martha. So to your point, what you just said, I would ask questions like, well, or I would lean into, there is this assumption that she is the host. I think the text even says that she's the one that greeted Jesus or something. The verse says something like that. She welcomed him or greeted him or something like that. It doesn't say Mary did that. It says Martha did that. It could have put both of them, but that's not what it says. And so there is some expectation in my mind that she leans into that is appropriate to the expectations of her time. She leans into what would be her responsibilities. So as I think about those who critique the work that she's doing, whether, the language of distraction or busyness, whatever it is, part of a question that I would be raising on this text is, who was going to do that? So what is the alternative if she chooses, well, I'm not going to do that, and yet she calls herself the host? It is presumed, the implication is she's the host. So what do we do with that when the host doesn't host? I don't know, but this is a question that I would ask. What do we do with that? Then the second thing that comes to mind in more contemporary language is Martha would be someone that in today's language, we might say overperforms. So not just does enough, but the text suggests that she's very, very involved in whatever her preparations are. And so sometimes that language is used to describe women in general, but I would say very particularly Black women, is that Black women tend to overperform. And, we can think about that in a couple of ways. In some ways, it's a critique of having to work too hard. So, again, I might ask the question of the text, especially if I were working with women, what are the pressures around us that make us have to work that hard? Why did she have to do that much? And we might even critique Jesus. This is where I get in trouble, because I do ask questions of Jesus. Why doesn't Mary have to help? If there's this much to do, is there something to be said about being our sister's keeper? And when we choose not to be our sister's keeper. And so I want to ask Jesus, what do you say about that? If you tell us to help one another and to love one another, do I just let my sister struggle? Because what I want to do seems to be more important. So if I were preaching it now, it'd be wrestling with those kinds of ideas, rather than just accepting a critique of Martha as if she's chosen to do something that is not needful.
Very good. Well, thank you. I appreciate your lens. And I think what I'm loving about this text and what drew me to it is that as much as I want to be Mary, I find myself being Martha. And I've known that for a very long time. And part of that is couched in my propensity to want to do things well. And so I see myself in Martha, and, I see so many contemporary women that I know that are Martha spirited, and we are encouraged to have I don't know if you've heard of the book or the phrase, how to have a Mary spirit in a Martha world. And I've tried that, and I've decided to just lean into who I am. And so hopefully this podcast and this word will just be powerful for women who find themselves landing in that zone, that, to be the best you can, and how to be a best Martha, because you can't be Mary. You weren't made Mary. So you were made Martha, and you got to work with what you got.
Why does one have to pick? That's my first kind of wrestling with that. And then 2, by wanting to be one or the other, it suggests that there's this kind of privileging of one or the other. And I think if I were preaching this text, I'd want to push against that. I'd want to push against this kind of privileging and hold them as coexistent with each other, because both are valuable and both are the reality of life. There is not one among us, to include monks and nuns, who all they do is just the phrase that's used in the text is sit at Jesus' feet. There's none among us. And so that's why I would push against picking either or, but rather there's got to be, even as we think of the larger idea of the text, there's got to be, for me, a larger message of the text than to be this or that. There's got to be a larger idea that Jesus is trying to, is that the author of this particular, I think Luke is what we read. There's got to be a larger idea that the author is after.
That is actually the point I want to press into, that there's a place for everyone. Like it doesn't have to be Mary is the celebrated one and Martha is the rebuked one. I hope that we would be able to look at people and say, Dr. Buggs is Dr. Buggs and Cynthia is Cynthia. And there's a place for, and not only is there a place for that, but an even larger picture is they need each other. Like that to me, that's the bigger message. If we can carry that message, that all of us have value, and more importantly, all of us need each other to make purpose, to make the world do what it's supposed to do, to leave our quote unquote mark on the world. We don't do that independently.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being at the table.
Just like Aretha Franklin, all Martha wants is a little respect. There really is room at the table for everyone. Just like Mary and Martha, we can all serve in our own way, and we need each other. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation, and we'll see you next time at the table. I'd like to say a very special thank you to all of our guests, Dr. Tim McNinch, and all of you. Our sounds today are from well-known music and movies right here in the USA. I'm leaving the table now, but feel free to stick around for some very special leftovers. So, me and you are real sisters. As we talked about, this is the table, how texts impact your whole real life. I really want to talk with you about is, what parting words would you give to the Marthas of the world? They happen to be like you and I, who are always doing something.
When we find ourselves overwhelmed, that means that now we're trying to do it in our own strength and not in the strength of the gift that God has given us. Meaning, go back to the giver of the gift and be like, hey, I need help here. And just be willing. Don't forget to ask. It's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to say, I need some help. Just ask, tell the Lord, I need some help, and he'll give you that help. He will.
But one thing you said that I think is very helpful is that Martha didn't consult Jesus. What I find interesting was Martha didn't ask Jesus for his help. She asked Jesus to get Mary to help. And that's supposedly, and see, there we go, interpreting biblical text. So that's a great lens to think about, that Martha never went to Jesus for Jesus' help, although she had the chief helper there.
Cynthia, thank you so much, Minister Cynthia. Thank you so much, little sister, for inviting me to join you. And I truly consider it an honor and a blessing to be able to sit at the table with you and dine. Thank you. expounded upon or preached to say that when Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are worried about many things, but only a few things matter, one thing matters. And Mary shows the significant part, the important part, that which will not be taken away. I don't believe that Jesus is chastising her. I believe that he's inviting her to the table to say, yes, what you're doing is important, but you're not going to have me forever. So it's okay for you to put that down and come into my presence. I don't think that he is admonishing her or chastising her as many people have taken it to be. I think that he says, Martha, Martha.
So think about when you say Martha, Martha, is it that so many people get so caught up in doing so much stuff that they sometimes don't focus? The priorities, you gotta have the priorities in order. And you don't just say, oh my God, I know I gotta get this. But the priority is that, hey, maybe it doesn't have to be as detailed in terms of cooking a gourmet 5-course meal. Maybe really and truly I could just do a 2-course meal. So not the Martha means that, you're not caught, you're so caught up in everything, but you're trying to do too much in one area. And versus saying, look, I have these things to do. I need to do this, and that is sufficient because this is what's most important, even though I have to do these other things. Not that I got to throw my whole body, my whole mind into everything I do, and it has to be to the utmost excellence that I end up missing the most important thing. I think that's a message for Cynthia Newman, though, but